actually going to talk about Salesforce Dx and source format and sort of what that means. This is really introductory. Is anybody using Salesforce Dx tooling today? Okay, some people. This might be a little bit rudimentary because this is really about like what you could, if you're not using DX right now, what you can start using. I'm going to demo some stuff as well. I'm Claire Bianchi. I'm the product manager for the command line interface on the DX team. So we build the CLI for you. We also build the plugin develop. I don't know what this. Oh, okay, sure. The plugin development framework, so you can extend the CLI commands. And then I work a lot with all of the other DX teams. So I'm just going to talk about what DX is, what are the tools that we have. I am also prone to walking around, so if you can't hear me, just point me back to the mic. And then I'm going to do a demo. All right, so what is Salesforce Dx? First of all, Salesforce Dx is not a product. It is a tool set. It is a set of tools that we give you to enable modern software development on the Salesforce platform. So you should be able to develop your app, your extensions to our mini clouds, all of these things using the same modern software best practices that anybody else in the software development industry can use. So those best practices include externalizing your source of truth, using a version control system like Git, using automated testing solutions like continuous integration, automating large portions of your deployment pipeline using continuous delivery. These are things that you should be able to do and haven't always been great with Salesforce. We want to make those great with Salesforce Dx tools. And we build these things, we really build thinking about team collaboration. How can you work better as a team? How can you work as a team that may have a variety of different skill sets? So you might have pro developers and low-code developers. How can we help those low-code developers use these modern software best practices? We built DX with pro devs in mind first because frankly, we hadn't done a lot of great stuff for you for a long time, but we're now starting to think about how do we get the low-code developers into that process as well. When we build these things, we think about how you can automate. We build in an open way so you can bring the tools that you love to Salesforce. So if you have a CI/CD tool that you love or you're already using within your company, you should be able to use it with Salesforce Dx tools. But we also like to be prescriptive and give you an idea of what is best practices with Salesforce? How should you be developing and releasing your apps and your extensions to, say, Sales Cloud or Community Cloud? And finally, we build for enterprise. So what does modern application lifecycle management look like at Salesforce? It looks like everywhere else. We want you to think about the lifecycle of your application. When you plan not just what you're building once and then you leave it there and you let it sit on a shelf. You're constantly going to be improving upon it. And you're going to make changes to it. And so you're going to go through a planning phase, a development phase. You're going to create some sort of release artifact, you're going to test, and you're going to release into production finally. This is the life cycle of any app. It should be the life cycle of a Salesforce app too. And on the DX team, we build a lot of tools that help you at each stage in this process. So today I'm not going to dive into unlocked packages, and I'm not going to dive a lot into continuous integration and delivery, but those are some of our more advanced capabilities that allow you to get farther down the road. Today I want to talk about the tools that you could use today if your workflow is change sets. So the first really wonderful thing that we have from DX is source format. So if you've ever pulled down a custom object into your local environment, you'll see, so right now in this sample project, I have two objects, and it just comes down as one file. And I'll show you kind of what an object looks like. In source format, that bot command is actually made up of a whole bunch of fields, a list view, as well as the thing itself. And that's because source format is just a reorganization of your metadata into an easy-to-read file structure. So it makes it much easier for you to find what you're working on. It makes it easier for you to identify bugs. It also means when you're making changes, you're deploying smaller changes. So instead of making a large change to a small change to a giant file, and then you have to deploy that whole file again, you can deploy a subset, and you can really pinpoint what you're working on. So your teams can be more agile, but they also just can work faster because it's easier to find what you need to make updates to. We have 2 development workflows. When I talk about these workflows, I want to make it very clear that org development and package development is actually sort of a spectrum of development. You can be doing a little bit of all of these things. And when I think about them, I think about how you deploy to your production org. So in package development, your deployment is you're installing a new package version. And in org development, your deployment is using the metadata API or change sets to move those changes into production. How you do the development on the front end of that doesn't necessarily matter. It's really how you get those changes into production. Now in package development, using scratch orgs is pretty much a must, and you have to have externalized your source of truth in order to manage your metadata into these packages. In org development, it's a complete spectrum. We see people who have not externalized their source of truth, and making all of their changes in sandboxes, and they're moving a delta of changes using the metadata API or change sets. But we also see people who have externalized their source of truth, still using sandboxes, externalized their source of truth using scratch orgs. There's a lot of things that you could be doing, but know that there's tools that I'll make it available to you sort of in any way that you want to work. Okay, so if we're talking about org development, because that's sort of more of an introductory thing when you start using DX tools, you're going to probably start here first. What does that life cycle look like? So first of all, we really recommend that you've externalized your source into a version control system. We recommend Git. You can use Perforce or a lot of other things. There's a whole bunch of different version control systems out there. But externalizing your source means that your team is always working with a source of truth that isn't the org. So you're not wondering, okay, well, is this scratch org the one, or this sandbox the one that's the most up to date? What is in production? What is different between them? You have a master branch in your version control system, and you're maintaining your source there, and you're understanding, okay, if I make a branch and I make a change, I merge back into it, and you have basically sort of a laundry list based off of commits of all of the things that have changed over time. It also enables you to enforce code reviews. You can automate your tests and automate your release management if you've externalized your source in a much easier way. And so you're going to be doing your development maybe in DevPro sandboxes. When you're done with the work, you're merging back to, or you're committing back to the version control system. You're running tests in a variety of different places. Maybe you're doing user acceptance testing in a full sandbox, so you have the product manager or the business owner take a look at what you're doing before you go to prod. But the way that this works is you should never be making changes in production. Please don't make changes in production. I know you're making changes in production. There's other ways. And even if changes are being made in this full sandbox, if you're able to commit back to the repo and you're able to maintain that source of truth, even if it's just a full sandbox in a prod org, and you have a master branch and you are using this workflow, even if it's just here, you've made so many leaps and bounds to a better way of working. Nope. Yeah, all right. So what are the tools? We talked about sandboxes. I think, who's using sandboxes? Everybody's using sandboxes. They're wonderful. They're a copy of your production org. You have your data there. You can use all of our builders. You can work really in a much more agile fashion because you're not getting in the way of production. You're not changing things for people who are actively working on stuff, your end users today. Sandboxes are great, and we're improving upon them. Lightning Developer Pro sandboxes, which are currently in pilot, allow you to do quick cloning. So they clone in a couple of minutes as opposed to a very, very long time. We're also working on doing that for full sandboxes, which is going to be really exciting. We have extensions to Visual Studio Code. So if you are a developer or are used to working in an IDE, we've added extensions to Visual Studio Code because it's becoming the #1 IDE in the industry. And we have said, okay, well, if this is the #1 IDE, we want it not just to say, here's a file, this is what it looks like. We want it to feel more like Salesforce. So we've added Apex debuggers and code completion for SOCL and Apex. We allow you to deploy on save into your org. And I'm going to actually demo a couple of things that will make sort of just working as a developer easier in Visual Studio Code in a moment. And finally, we have the Salesforce Cli. This sort of underpins a lot of DX. This is the tool that I own. But it's a scriptable interface that allows you to script a lot of your manual tasks. And manual tasks are really problematic. They take a long time, but also they introduce a lot of bugs because it's possible that different people on your team are performing the same set of actions in a different way, and there's not consistency. And if you can write a script and have that script run every time you need to, say, set up your sandbox for development, or you want to make sure that your deployment is consistent every time, that's what the CLI is for. Other things that you can do is you can create Apex classes or LWC components. You can synchronize using the metadata API, and we have a variety of different commands that allow you to do this between your org, your local environment, and then finally move those changes into your version control system. This is sort of your gateway with the CLI. And then finally, we have great authentication that allows you to manage your orgs. So I have probably 27 different orgs that I have created over time. They're sandboxes and production orgs, and every time I do a demo, and my CLI keeps track of them. I've authenticated into them, I remember them, and it's easier for me to move in and out. I don't have to sign in every time. It's really helpful. All right, so let's take a quick look. How am I doing on time?
10 minutes.
Cool, awesome.
14.
Oh, 14, that's not bad. All right, so this is Visual Studio Code, and so as I mentioned before, I wanted to show you what an object looks like in Visual Studio Code if it's in metadata format. Here is a book custom object that I created, and it's this giant XML file. That's all I know about it when I go here. If I go into my Force app and look at it in source format, I can look at my objects. Here is my book object. Notice that my book object is actually made up of this file, which is the actual metadata for the custom object, a list view, as well as 3 fields. All of that stuff is in this metadata file, but you'd never know it. So say all I wanted to do was make a change. So we just learned that we have a new book coming in, and the author has like 100 characters in their name, and currently we've limited it to 80 characters. I can just go in, find that field, and make a change here. And then I can deploy that to my org. And now that change will be available in my org. And so speaking of org, so this is what source format does. It gives you, it's easy to navigate. You can find all the pieces within your objects, your Apex classes. So other things that we have done to improve upon Visual Studio Code and make it feel more like Salesforce is we allow you to authenticate into your orgs and manage them. So right now I have anything that I'm doing here, it's defaulting to my French Dreaming org, but I could just switch to another org, and that would be my default org. And I can also authorize into a new org. This will take me through a web auth flow. It will save that, and so now I don't have to log in every time I need to make a change. What's also great about Visual Studio Code is if you are savvy, with the terminal is built in. If you don't want to, move outside of the terminal, or the terminal is a little bit scary, you can do stuff directly in Visual Studio Code and use the embedded terminal there. So I can actually open my org here. Let's see. Speedier than earlier. Internet is getting better. All right, so here's my org. We'll go to setup. Let's see if that change has made it all the way to my object. So here's my book custom object. And here is that field. And you'll notice now it's 100 as opposed to 80. But if we go back and say I want to add something new, I can do that directly from here. So if I want to add a new field, say a date for the copyright, live demos, always fun. Right date. save that. Okay, so now I have a new field on this custom object that's clearly not available right now in what I have, but we have this awesome thing that actually shows you for if your default org that you've set is either a production org or a sandbox org or some sort of dev org, anything but a scratch org, we actually have this org picker, or org browser, sorry, that allows you to see all of the metadata associated with that org. And this is what's in the org right now. So if I navigate to my custom objects and my book component, I can say, all right, I want to bring down any changes that I've made. It'll warn me and just say like, hey, have you made a change locally? Because this is going to override it. Like, that's okay. I haven't done anything. So it's going to pull that down. It's going to do a source retrieve, which might take a moment. 10 minutes. Awesome. Oh, I'm doing great on time. All right, so we've retrieved that. And then, in a second, it should show up as a new field. Live demo. I'll come back. All right, well, let's give it a moment, but the output says everything worked. So, oh, there it is. Thank you. Yeah. So that's how you can pull that down. So if you were more used to working in our builders or in the sandbox itself, you can make those changes up there, but still maintain them here. And then if you've integrated with, this is just a sample org, so it's not talking to a version control system, but say I used GitHub, I could then commit those changes back into the repo. If somebody else has set up continuous integration or you have, it would kick off an automated testing pipeline if that's what you have set up, and you could still be a part of that process even though you're maybe not working in scratch orgs and so on. So that is some of the benefits and some of the goodies that we've added to Visual Studio Code that make it feel a little bit more like Salesforce. All right, so let's go back to the slides. Okay, so modern application lifecycle management and sort of what we provided you at DX gets better the more things that you've used, but we don't expect you to adopt it all in one day. That's crazy. Anybody who can take a legacy giant org and adopt unlocked packaging in one day is my hero. There is absolutely no way you're doing that. That's crazy. So the first thing that you should do is think about our developer tools. Use the Salesforce Cli, download Visual Studio Code for DX and our DX extensions. There's an extension pack, which installs all of those extensions that I just showed you. Some of them you have to pre-configure. The org browser, I believe, is still something you have to enable in setup because it's in beta. But generally, all of those things are available that I showed you and easy to use. But then the next thing that you want to think about is externalizing your source of truth. And if you can just get to stage 2, you have achieved so much with modern application lifecycle development. You have improved the way that you build, and your team is going to be super happy. So that is finding a version control system that you like. We have a whole bunch of trailheads about sort of how to set these up. There's 3 sort of main Git ones out there: Bitbucket, GitHub, and GitLab. They all do great things, but generally it's a version control system. They're based off of Git. You can move your code into there. There'll be like one major commit that's insane, that's got all your metadata, and then you can move forward from that. But that really will improve your workflow. The next step is automating a lot of key processes with automated testing, which is CI. This is a little bit more advanced. It requires you to either, if you're using some of the version control systems that have embedded CI, you can just use what's there, but it still requires you to learn a little bit of YAML, which is sort of the programming language that you need to understand to set up automated testing. We have provided you with a ton of example repositories that you can get to in the force.com GitHub repo that help you start up. So if you're still using sandboxes, that's totally fine. We have an example, YAML file for doing org-based development with sandboxes, with Travis, with Circle, with Jenkins, with Bamboo, with Bitbucket, with pretty much anything, and then we're working on more. So if you really want to start using CI, we hopefully are giving you the first steps. There's also a trail that uses Travis CI. Then finally, it's modularizing your code. This could be breaking it up into packaging or just breaking it up into microservices and into different repositories. This also often requires a change in the way that your teams work together, because it means that you are structuring your teams around either the unlocked packages that you've defined or the repositories that you've defined, so that you've identified where are the interdependencies within your metadata, as well as how you want teams to be structured and who gets to work on what, which is actually really important, because it means when you go to make a change and you know there's an interdependency, you know who to ask to make the change. And it isn't that every single person on the team can always make a change to every single piece of metadata, and then it is Wild West and crazy. You have defined a structure, and so the people who are experts in Apex own the repo where the majority of your Apex lives. The people that own more of the UI elements and your LWC components, they're experts there, and then they're not having to fight over how that release process works, because you can sort of move them into their own silos. So I've already talked about how you can get started with DX, install the CLI, install VS Code and our extension pack. There's actually a really great bit of documentation that Nate Totten, the other product manager on my team, wrote with our doc writers around how to do Salesforce with Visual Studio Code. It just walks you through, like, okay, how do I install this? I'm using org-based development. Here are a couple things I need to know, and then I'm ready to go. There's also a couple of trails. If you're not at all familiar with modern application lifecycle development, this first one is a really great thing to start with, and then the org development model. We also have ones on packaging, just DX, like an easy startup. Those are the great ways to get started. And that's all I had. Questions? Yeah?
Yes, please. So we try to use unlock packages,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got several ones so as to cut in a lot of different way our app. And the problem is we don't really know how to make it in the right way.
You don't know how to break
again.
up your metadata into like the right set of packages? Is that what you mean?
No, that's not the problem. The problem is we're using CI and CD, and when we create a scratcher so as to install all our packages, it doesn't really install in the right order.
Mm-hmm.
We try to have a main one, for example, the data model, and also several other ones where we put the dependencies, but
Do you have multiple package directories in the same SFDX project?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so right now that isn't supported. My team is working on that in this release. And so it is not a great experience right now. It will be a better experience in the next release.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In the source format, is the sort of ordering of elements within that metadata reasonably predictable? One of the biggest challenges we had with the metadata API was that a small change can knock out the sequencing, and then when you do a diff in your source control, you're in for a world of pain, because everything's in the wrong place. It's saying, well, this section's missing, but then it's added in here, and you get loads of false positives. We ended up having to do huge amounts of regex and Perl scripts and Christ knows what else, just to try and strip that metadata down to bit we actually changed. But is that improved in source format?
It is a bit, but not as much as we'd like it to. And so Nate and I have been talking about ways to improve upon it. It's not, ideally it would be maybe in like an alphabetical order or in sort of a structure, but the way that we built SFDX projects is you can move all of those folders around. And because of that, sometimes things don't quite always stay
Yeah, it's not so
within
much the folders, but the content,
with the content of the file.
Yeah.
It's the same as the underlying metadata, so it changes. But
Right.
Nate and I are trying to figure out if there's a way that we can actually automatically make it alphabetical, so it would just be an insert.
That'd be good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any news about how clone the command to be able to clone the configuration of the sandbox or the production? Because it's difficult for the scratcher to
Yes.
manage it.
All I can say is there are announcements coming at Dreamforce.
Forward-looking statement.
Forward looking. I don't have that here. None of this is stuff that you can't just play with today. But yes. Yeah.
My question is around the CLI retrieve mechanism. First part of the question is, does it use the same, underlying metadata API?
Yes.
Right. So the challenges that what I was trying to do lately was to try to find the least permissive scope to be able to retrieve some metadata.
Okay.
Right?
Mhm.
Without full access to the data. Now, I couldn't find any scope that will give me just access to retrieve the metadata without, being able to read all the data in an org. Is there anything that you can point me to achieve this? Or
Let's talk offline after this. Let me think about that for a second.
okay, thank you.
Anything else? Yes.
When do you think community will be available to set this? Community?
It's a really good question. So we are working with the community team to make it better. There's some stuff that Rohit, who's the product manager for Scratch Orgs, is doing and getting them more involved. But anything you can do to continue to push on the communities team for us is highly recommended. But we're working with them. We're trying to get things more in line with communities. But I would say we will have better support in the next release, but it won't be complete. And I'm hoping in about 2 to 3 releases it'll be a lot better. But again, it's a constant struggle because they're also developing a lot of great new things, and it's a chicken and the egg problem. Whereas they continue to push the envelope and build the things that you want, they don't necessarily have the time to go back and support it in DX. So we're working with them really closely to make it work.
Any recommendations on like profile management?
Ooh, that's a hard question.
Profiles, how to avoid them, or any thoughts on that?
How to avoid profiles. That's what your git ignore and your ignore files are for. So we do recommend that maybe you don't, but we do want you to use permission sets. And permission set groups are sort of going to be that thing that you can use as, so profile is it's a person, but it also is a group of permissions. Right now, permissions are so granular, it's hard to make that migration over to perm sets. So perm set groups will help that. I don't actually know what the timeline is for perm set groups, but it is in the next couple of releases. I don't have great recommendations right now. Profiles do not work well with SFDX. Perm sets do. Perm sets are what we built for because of the future of what you'll be using.
So, to elaborate on that same question, so you would advise to go more for perm sets than profiles? There is
Yes.
no, Salesforce is not going to break up profile files like they did with object files?
No.
Okay, so perm sets is the
Perm sets is the future.
way
Yes.
forward.
Mhm.
There's a nice extension from shaded logging to
Yes.
break down a profile into permission sets automatically because there's a command in the Salesforce Dx toolbelt, which I really can recommend because he really has a lot of tools inside, especially around these topics.
Yeah, Shane's got a couple of different great plugins and repositories. There's also a free app on the App Exchange that helps you convert them in a more clicks, not code way. I think I might be out of time. All right. Thank you, everybody.